Have you ever experienced that heavy feeling in your chest when someone you deeply care about suddenly pulls away without saying a single word? Sighs. Time seems to slow down, minutes feel like hours, and the silence becomes impossible to ignore. You find yourself checking your phone over and over, hoping their name will finally appear. Every notification makes your heart jump, only for disappointment to hit when it isn't them. Your mind keeps replaying every conversation you've had together. You search for hidden meanings, wondering if you missed something important. At night, sleep becomes difficult because your thoughts refuse to stop. Whispers. You wonder if they've forgotten you, if they ever truly saw you, or if they simply don't care anymore. Deep inside, you realize that sometimes the uncertainty hurts even more than the distance itself. Someone's absence doesn't always mean love has disappeared, but prolonged silence will always challenge your patience, your emotions, and your sense of self. It leaves you feeling stuck between hope and doubt, unable to move forward while waiting for something you cannot control. But beneath that silence, something else is happening. There's an invisible psychological process unfolding, one that quietly determines whether they'll come back, when they'll reach out, and what finally pushes them to do it. This isn't just distance, it's avoidance, a complicated struggle where fear and longing constantly compete with one another. And while they're fighting that battle internally, you're living through every painful second of uncertainty. If you've been here before, then you know exactly what it feels like. The waiting, the questions, the endless silence that seems louder than words. You ask yourself why they haven't contacted you. Are they thinking about you? Do you still matter? Or were you simply never enough? Here's something most people never say out loud. Avoidant people don't reconnect simply because they miss you. They don't reach out just because love suddenly becomes stronger. Instead, there is a very specific psychological moment that has to happen first. It can't be rushed, manipulated, or forced. No amount of chasing or convincing will make it arrive sooner. That moment comes when their fear of closeness finally becomes weaker than their desire to reconnect. It's when a hidden part of them begins admiring how you've handled their absence, how you stayed composed instead of chasing, and how your life continued even without them. If you've convinced yourself that you're powerless during no contact, think again. If you're constantly analyzing unread messages, social media activity, or every tiny sign they might notice you, it's time to stop. Today, you'll understand exactly why avoidant people eventually reach out, what happens inside their minds, and why their timing follows a pattern most people completely misunderstand. Picture the silence again. Someone important disappears, and suddenly every unanswered question becomes louder than anything they ever said. You begin wondering if they even remember you anymore, or if you've already been erased from their world. The truth is that avoidant people experience emotions differently from most others. They don't reconnect simply because they feel nostalgic. They don't send a message just because they remember happy memories. Before they ever text or call, something much deeper has to shift inside them. Understanding that internal shift changes everything because it explains why no contact often seems unpredictable. Avoidant individuals constantly live between two powerful forces. They genuinely crave connection, yet real emotional closeness activates fear almost automatically. It isn't usually personal. It's the result of deeply rooted emotional patterns and psychological conditioning. The moment they finally reach out isn't random or impulsive. It happens when the discomfort of staying disconnected finally becomes greater than the fear of opening themselves emotionally again. Imagine a pressure cooker sitting on a stove. Pressure builds little by little. Every passing day, every memory, every thought adds more weight until eventually the pressure becomes impossible to contain. That's when they finally act. When you look at it that way, their behavior starts making sense. Avoidant people often operate through control, careful timing, and internal calculation. Their silence isn't always proof that they don't care. More often, they wait until their emotional equation finally favors connection instead of distance. You may wonder how you'll recognize that moment when it happens. The honest answer is that you probably won't. You can't predict it, and you certainly can't force it. That's exactly why it feels so unexpected. What you can do is understand the process. Every memory of you, every passing reminder, every quiet thought telling them they should reconnect, adds another small weight to one side of the scale. Eventually, that balance shifts, and without warning, they reach out. Here's the difficult part to accept. That moment isn't entirely about you. It's not a measurement of your worth, your value, or whether your love mattered enough. It's the result of an internal psychological conflict they're experiencing. You may be part of that struggle, but you are never the entire reason it exists. Even so, when they finally return, something important changes. That's when your power begins, not during the endless waiting, not while you're questioning yourself every day. The moment they reconnect gives you the opportunity to see the situation clearly, understand what was really happening, and remember your own value without losing yourself. Avoidance is confusing because it constantly mixes desire with hesitation. One day they're distant, emotionally unavailable, and seemingly gone. Then suddenly, once fear loses its grip, they return. When that happens, everything becomes much easier to understand. You stop searching for hidden meanings in every delayed reply or every period of silence. You begin realizing that consistency reflects genuine intention, while avoidance often reveals fear speaking louder than love. That's the pattern so many people overlook. They see the silence and immediately assume it means indifference. They convince themselves they never mattered. But silence alone never tells the whole story. Avoidant people aren't disappearing because they enjoy hurting you. Most of the time, they're trying to protect themselves. They're constantly trying to balance their emotional need for connection with their fear of becoming too close. Once you recognize that pattern, everything begins to look different. You stop making excuses for the silence. You stop searching for hidden meanings in every pause, and you begin seeing what's really happening. The reality is surprisingly simple. An avoidant usually reaches out when the emotional pain of staying away becomes stronger than the fear of reconnecting. Their decision isn't based on a random impulse. It's the result of an internal balance finally shifting. You'll notice it not because of the promises they make, but because their behavior changes. Their actions reveal what words often cannot. The biggest lesson is this: stop exhausting yourself trying to decode every unanswered message or replay every conversation in your mind. Instead, pay attention to what they consistently do, when they act, and how they behave over time. That's where the real answers are. That's how you learn the difference between someone who keeps you as an option and someone who genuinely wants a place in your life. Avoidant people move according to their own emotional timing. Once you understand that, you stop expecting them to react the way most people would. You begin recognizing that they're responding to the intensity of their own internal conflict, the constant push toward closeness, and the equally powerful urge to pull away. What many people never realize is that your own behavior quietly influences that process. Even if you're completely unaware of it, your calmness, your ability to continue living your life, your healthy boundaries, and your refusal to chase all become part of their internal equation. As they watch you move forward without desperately trying to pull them back, something starts to shift inside them. Avoidance once felt like the safest place to hide. It offered comfort, predictability, and emotional protection. But over time, that same distance can become uncomfortable. Your absence begins reflecting everything they no longer have. They start noticing the space you once filled, and the thoughts they tried to suppress begin returning more often. Little by little, the fear of losing you starts becoming greater than the fear of emotional closeness. This gradual shift is something most people never see. They only notice the message that suddenly appears after weeks or months of silence. What they don't see is the quiet psychological struggle that happened long before that message was ever sent. Once you understand this pattern, your perspective changes completely. You stop taking every delayed reply personally. You stop analyzing every sentence they send or every pause between conversations. Instead, you recognize that what you're witnessing is a psychological tipping point rather than a simple game or calculated manipulation. That understanding gives you something incredibly valuable: peace. You no longer spend your days wondering why they haven't called or why they haven't texted. You accept that they're dealing with an internal battle you cannot control. The only thing truly within your control is your own life, your personal growth, your emotional health, and the boundaries you choose to maintain. Ironically, the more you invest in yourself instead of obsessing over them, the more likely it becomes that their internal balance shifts. When they eventually reach out, it isn't only because they miss your presence, it's because they've reached a point where remaining distant feels more painful than risking another connection. When that moment arrives, everything can change. If you're prepared to meet it without slipping back into chasing, pleading, or overthinking, you'll respond from confidence instead of fear. The next time someone suddenly disappears and the silence lasts far longer than you expected, remember this. They're not necessarily ignoring you to punish you, and they aren't always trying to test your feelings. More often, they're navigating a deeply personal emotional conflict that only they can resolve. Once that internal balance finally shifts, their decision to reconnect feels intentional, clear, and almost impossible for them to resist. Whether you realize it or not, you've already influenced that process through the way you've handled their absence. There's another important truth that many people overlook. When an avoidant reaches out, it doesn't only reveal what's happening inside their mind, it also reflects the changes they've observed in you. That may sound surprising at first. After all, how could your actions affect someone who's been avoiding closeness? The answer is simpler than it seems. The moment you stop chasing, establish healthy boundaries, and continue building your own life, you become a mirror they can't easily ignore. And mirrors have a unique kind of power. They don't simply reflect what exists. They also reveal what's missing, what has been lost, and what the heart quietly continues searching for. When you're constantly available, always responding immediately, always looking for reassurance or trying to earn someone's attention, what message does that send? It tells them you'll always be there no matter what, that the connection isn't going anywhere. For an avoidant person, certainty rarely creates movement. What often creates movement is the possibility of loss, curiosity, and the realization that things may not stay the same forever. The moment you stop centering your life around them and begin fully investing in yourself, something changes. You continue growing. You enjoy your life. You protect your peace instead of waiting by the phone. From a distance, they begin noticing that your world hasn't stopped simply because they stepped away. That realization becomes difficult to ignore. The emotional distance they once relied on for comfort begins showing them something they weren't prepared to face, a future where you're no longer waiting. Suddenly, the closeness they feared feels less threatening than the possibility of losing you altogether. As that realization settles in, an invisible tension begins building inside them. Day by day, the emotional pressure increases until the fear of missing the connection becomes greater than the fear of vulnerability itself. That's the moment everything shifts. That is often when they finally reach out. The silence breaks. The cycle of pulling away and returning starts to make sense. Not because you chased them, begged for attention, or analyzed every interaction, but because your calm confidence, your healthy boundaries, and your willingness to move forward became impossible for them to overlook. Understanding this changes the way you experience their behavior. You stop assuming every period of silence is a personal rejection. Instead, you recognize it as evidence of an internal conflict they're trying to resolve. Their actions say far more about their emotional struggle than they do about your worth. At the same time, you discover something equally important, your own strength. You realize the power of respecting yourself, protecting your energy, and creating healthy boundaries. Ironically, the less your life revolves around their choices, the more your absence becomes meaningful within their own emotional process. When they eventually reconnect, it isn't simply because they suddenly missed you. It's because remaining disconnected has become emotionally harder than risking another conversation. Once you understand that, you stop chasing, you stop pleading for explanations, you stop searching for hidden meanings behind every message or delayed reply. Instead, you continue living your life with purpose. You focus on your own growth, protect your emotional well-being, and refuse to abandon yourself for someone else's uncertainty. That's what creates the healthiest foundation for any future connection. It isn't built on fear or desperation, it's built on self-respect. You no longer feel trapped by silence or dependent on signs that may never come. Instead, you recognize that when an avoidant reaches out, you're witnessing the conclusion of a long internal struggle rather than a random decision. And because you've remained grounded throughout the process, you're able to respond with clarity instead of anxiety. Avoidant people are constantly evaluating competing emotions. They weigh the safety of distance against the desire for closeness. They compare the comfort of staying away with the emotional cost of remaining disconnected. Your absence quietly speeds up that internal process because it reminds them that life continues moving forward, with or without them. As they watch you continue living, something gradually shifts inside. Their fear doesn't disappear overnight, but it no longer dominates every decision. Desire begins competing with it. They slowly realize that silence isn't providing the comfort it once did. Instead, it starts highlighting everything they've been missing. They're not only thinking about you, they're thinking about what you represented in their life: emotional stability, genuine connection, confidence, and authenticity. There's something almost paradoxical about it. The very intimacy they once avoided becomes the thing they begin wanting after seeing the healthy space you've created. None of this requires manipulation. You're not trying to make them jealous or force a reaction. You're simply honoring yourself, maintaining your boundaries, and refusing to shrink your life to accommodate someone else's fears. Without intending to, that becomes the catalyst for change inside them. This is why no contact can sometimes be so effective. It isn't designed to punish another person or make them regret their choices. Its real purpose is to create enough emotional space for both people to face reality honestly. It allows the avoidant to experience the discomfort they've been escaping instead of continuously running from it. Eventually, if that discomfort grows stronger than their fear of vulnerability, they reach the psychological tipping point. That's when they decide to reconnect. Your silence was never empty. It quietly reflected their own emotional conflict back to them, and that reflection became increasingly difficult to ignore. The irony is that many people spend this period doing the exact opposite of what helps them most. They overthink every interaction, analyze every social media update, and interpret every delay as rejection or manipulation. In reality, what they're witnessing is often an emotional pause, a necessary period that forces the avoidant to experience the consequences of continued distance. When they finally reach out, it isn't random. It's the result of an internal realization that developed over time, supported by the healthy boundaries you've maintained all along. Most importantly, never believe you're powerless during no contact. You're not helpless, and your value doesn't depend on whether someone sends a message. Every time you invest in yourself, protect your peace, pursue your goals, and continue building your own life, you're creating an environment where clarity becomes possible for both of you. Your life becomes the mirror that reflects reality back to them. And mirrors don't distort the truth. Eventually, if they're willing to face it, the discomfort of remaining distant becomes heavier than the fear of reconnecting. That's often when the call comes, the message arrives, and communication begins again. So if you ever find yourself doubting your worth during a period of silence, remember this: you are not simply waiting, you are growing, you are strengthening your boundaries. You are creating a life that doesn't depend on someone else's choices. Every step you take toward yourself quietly contributes to the moment they may eventually choose to reconnect. And if that day comes, it won't be because of luck or coincidence. It will be the result of a psychological process that has been unfolding beneath the surface all along. It's the result of the quiet work you've been doing all along. That's the real power of healthy boundaries, self-respect, and continuing to live your life without apology. Many people misunderstand avoidant behavior. It isn't simply about wanting love while fearing it. Inside, they're often caught between two opposing forces. One part of them longs for closeness, while another insists that distance is the safest choice. When they finally reach out after a long silence, it usually comes from that internal conflict, not from impulse, but from a decision that has been building over time. Their emotions may tell them they miss you and want to reconnect, but their protective instincts carefully weigh every possible risk. They analyze reactions, imagine rejection, and prepare themselves for emotional uncertainty. That's why they often withdraw even when they genuinely care. Eventually, however, the emotional cost of staying away becomes greater than the fear of reconnecting. That's the psychological tipping point. This is why many people misunderstand an avoidance return. It's easy to assume they've suddenly changed or fully committed, but in many cases, they're responding to an internal struggle between fear and desire. Their behavior may seem inconsistent, yet it usually reflects a shift in what feels emotionally safer rather than a lack of genuine feelings. Understanding this helps you stop taking every delay or silence personally. Instead of questioning your worth, you recognize that they're navigating their own emotional process. That perspective allows you to protect your peace, maintain your boundaries, and respond thoughtfully rather than emotionally. Avoidant people often carry guilt, shame, confusion, and fear alongside their desire for connection. They worry about losing independence, becoming emotionally dependent, or feeling vulnerable. Every day they remain silent. That internal pressure slowly increases until reconnecting feels less frightening than continuing to hide. This changes the way you experience no contact. Patience no longer means waiting helplessly. It means continuing to build your own life while allowing them to work through their own emotional conflict. Your confidence, emotional stability, and willingness to move forward often become the very things that encourage their internal shift. When they return, remember that it rarely happens without warning. Before the message or phone call, there are often small signs. They may view your stories like old posts, leave subtle comments, or find quiet ways to stay connected. These aren't guarantees, nor should they become something you obsess over. They're simply small indicators that their emotional walls may be beginning to lower. Those small interactions are often the first cracks in the barrier they've built. Instead of jumping back into connection immediately, they test the emotional waters. They ask themselves if they're ready, if it feels safe, and whether they can handle the vulnerability that comes with reaching out. Looking at each small action by itself can be misleading. But when you step back, you begin noticing a pattern. The silence becomes less complete. Their curiosity becomes more visible. Their distance slowly gives way to cautious connection. Think of it like watching a storm develop. Before the rain begins, the wind changes, clouds gather, and the atmosphere shifts. The same thing often happens with avoidant behavior. Their return usually follows a series of subtle emotional changes rather than appearing out of nowhere. Understanding this process puts you back in control. You stop chasing explanations and stop reacting to every tiny signal. Instead, you observe with clarity while continuing to focus on your own life. You don't sacrifice your peace or abandon your boundaries hoping for a response. The most important truth is this: their return is usually the result of many small psychological shifts that have built over time. It isn't luck or coincidence. It's the moment when the discomfort of remaining distant finally becomes greater than the fear of reconnecting. Once you understand that, everything feels different. You stop obsessing over every like, every delayed reply, or every brief interaction. You see the larger pattern instead of isolated moments. That awareness gives you confidence because you no longer depend on their timing to determine your value. You continue living fully. You protect your energy. You stay grounded in your own life. And if they eventually reach out, you're ready, not desperate or anxious, but calm, confident, and able to decide what truly serves you. Because their return isn't an accident, it's the outcome of a long emotional process. Every small signal, every quiet moment of curiosity, and every cautious step toward connection gradually leads to the point where their fear no longer outweighs their desire. When that balance finally changes, they reach out, not by chance, but because their own internal journey has brought them there.